Hey everybody, it's Joe Solari with the Business of Writing, and today we have Evan Gow with Story Origin. How you doing, Evan?
Pretty good. Thanks for having me on, and hello to everyone out there.
Yeah, for those that you don't know, Evan has a product called Story Origin. It helps authors with managing a lot of their marketing, and we're going to get into that in a minute. But I think what a good place to start, I think something that a lot of people don't know about you, Evan, is your past life and what you did before you started as the founder of Story Origin. So I thought maybe if you talk a little bit about your time in private equity and bring some of those insights from the perspective of an investor to all these folks out there that are business owners.
Yeah, sure. I'd love to get into that. Prior to founding Story Origin, I worked at a private equity fund, and we invested in one of the verticals that we focused on was internet and information services companies. And I spent a lot of time looking at SaaS companies, which is software as a service, or companies with recurring subscription revenue. And I think there's a ton of parallels between, how you think about investing in those kinds of companies and how you as an author think about investing in your own business.
Yeah, I think that's certainly something that a lot of authors don't think about is they think, yes, I'm the creator, I am the CEO, but they never think about themselves as an investor in their business. They're the single biggest investor, regardless of how much capital they may have put in. They're certainly putting in a lot of sweat equity.
Right.
So maybe you could talk a little bit about some of the things that you think are important for business owners to focus on.
Yeah. So one of the things that I think is most easy to sort of parallel between companies, where you think about investing as a company and as an author is, an author business is very similar to the subscription services, right? So you can think about your series as sort of a recurring revenue stream, right? Mm-hmm. Where someone that buys into the first book, they're going to read through into the second book, the third book, and then go on maybe into another series. Or if you've got, a 6 or 7 book series, going to keep reading through into that series, right? Mm-hmm. And so, that's sort of how you want to think about things. You don't necessarily just want to think about things on a purely standalone book basis, because when you're only trying to market a single book, it really hampers the total lifetime value that you can get from your potential customers or readers in this case, right? What is the total amount of money that you'll make from any customer over the lifetime of them being a customer of yours? And the more books that you write in a series, the higher that lifetime value is going to be, right? Yeah. So there are, things that you can think about is increasing your read-through rate, having more books in the series or having multiple series. And then other things like, whenever you try out a subscription product, typically those companies will offer you some sort of free trial, right? And that's their way of letting you test out the service before really buying into it so that you can see if you like it or not. Mm. And so that plays into the entire idea of also having a reader magnet, which is typically a short story prequel to your series. It might be 15 to 20,000 words or something of the sort. And you give that prequel away for free when someone signs up to your mailing list. But you're giving that away for free so that they can test you out as an author. And then hopefully the read-through rate on that prequel is very good. And so then they ultimately want to buy into the series. Mm.
Yeah, that's a really good analogy. Kind of a different bend on it. So as a small business owner, and you know this because you're doing it yourself right now, you tend to not think like an investor. Right. Can you give the audience a little insight into what it was Trillium, right?
Tritium, yeah.
Tritium. what Tritium's expectations were when they were investing in a company and kind of returns they were looking for on the money that they were putting in. And
yeah. So typically what you want to see is, you know, I would be the one that would typically be building the financial models.
mm-hmm.
That was sort of one of my primary roles at Tritium. So taking the historical financials from the company and sort of projecting those out. And we would look at what is called an internal rate of return, an IRR. It's basically the percentage return that you would get from that investment every year.
Mm-hmm.
And what we would look for is, you know, we would want about a 30% IRR as our target. And
mm-hmm.
what that means is, if you just think about it as, you know, like a cash on cash, like multiple on invested capital, what you would want to look for is essentially a 3 times return on your invested capital over the course of 5 years. Mm. So if you put in $1 in 5 years, you want to get $3 out. Mm. And that is looking at things on a very long horizon, because, you know, it was a private equity fund. So you're investing sort of for much longer term than you are as an author. As an author, your investments are typically going to be a much shorter horizon, where you're talking about, okay, I'm going to invest $1 of ad spend here, and then I want to get $3 of revenue out. And that might not be, you know, hopefully that's not a 5-year sort of thing. But when you're looking at SaaS companies, again, these subscription service companies, typically what you want to see is a 3x return on sort of their marketing and advertising budget, because they put $1 in, you get $3 out, right? So that $1, so one of those dollars goes to pays your previous, you know, the expense of having made that ad in the first place. The next dollar goes to putting another $1 into more ads, mm-hmm. right? So that you can, and then that third $1 is sort of paying for your employees, or in this case, you know, that would be sort of what you're making as an author, mm-hmm. You know, paying for your living expenses. Yeah. So you sort of want to see a 3x return on those investments, so that you can, you know, again, pay for the previous expense, pony up for the next one, and then also, you know, make money to keep living. So
yeah, well, I think it's good. It's a good thing for folks to understand, any small business owner, how an investor thinks, for 2 reasons. One is, if you're ever in that situation where somebody wants to invest in your business, how they're thinking about the situation. And then 2 is, you know, for most authors, you have to be a bit schizophrenic. You have to be the writer, you have to be the marketer, you have to be the CEO, you have to be the investor. And if you're not shooting for those kind of targets of, you know, a 3x cash on cash return, then you're not going to, one, run the business the right way, right? If your investor doesn't have those, your investor personality doesn't have that expectation, then how can you, as the manager of that business, do that, right? And
right.
I'm sure, like, I've done it myself, and you probably have some stories of your own, of like, you're so passionate about a project that you're not looking at it from an investment perspective, right? You're thinking about, well, I'll build it and they will come, or I'll, you know, I know that the market's there. I just have to get to that place.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that can certainly be, you know, and it depends on what kind of writer you want to be, right? Not all writers are necessarily purely in it to make a living as a writer. It's they mm-hmm. have a story in their head and they want to get that out. Mm-hmm. And I think part of being an author, you know, entrepreneur, is figuring out what it is that you really want out of it. Is mm-hmm. do you want it to be a business where it's something that you do full time and you're really focused on investing in it? Or is it something that, you know, you do as a side project because you get joy out of it, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Sure. So why don't you tell us a little bit, you know, you left the finance world and got into software in the author space. So tell us a little bit about that path and kind of what got you here and what you're doing now.
Yeah, sure. So I was really into writing stories back when I was in high school. And then in college, during my senior year, I went to this program called 3-Day Startup. You essentially spend 3 days with some friends trying to build and pitch a business idea.
Mm-hmm.
And that really is what sparked my my desire to pursue entrepreneurship full time. And so when I was thinking about leaving Tritium and what I wanted to do next, I had a bunch of ideas for things I wanted to do as an entrepreneur, but I wanted to also go back to sort of something that I'd been passionate about since high school, which was writing and stories. And so I decided to combine those passions and build a platform for writers and helping them to market. So Story Origin takes sort of my learnings from, both my time as an investor and on the finance side, and then also, my passion for writing. And so what it is a marketing tool that helps authors cross-promote one another. And so you can run newsletter swaps where those are direct one-to-one cross-promotions. So I'll share your book in my newsletter, you share my book in your newsletter, or group promotions where you, me, and 20 other, steampunk authors will all have our books listed on a single landing page. And then we all share the link to that landing page with our own newsletters. And we're all cross-promoting everyone that's in that group.
Mm-hmm. So, and just for some folks that may be new to this, let's kind of unpack the whole idea of newsletter swaps, because like CJ Perry and some other guys that have been on before that have talked about it. And I personally believe that for an author just beginning, this is the most effective way to build an audience and figure out if you have a product to sell is through newsletter swaps and building your mailing list. So why don't you kind of get into the basics there and how the tool helps you do that? Yeah.
So newsletter swaps, let's say you, Joe, have a newsletter. I'm just going to make this up. Let's say it's got 1,000 subscribers on it. I've got a mailing list with, 1,000 subscribers on it or something as well. And so I can post a post on Story Origin that says, I've got a mailing list of this size. It's going out in 2 weeks. This is the book that I'm looking for people to promote. And then you, Joe, could apply to swap with me. And so you would tell me what your list size is, when your campaign's going out, what book you want promoted. And then I can choose to either accept or decline that swap. And so on the date that my campaign goes out, essentially what I do is I just include a link to your book in my next newsletter. Mm-hmm. And newsletter swaps so that's mechanically how it works. What is the value of doing a newsletter swap? Well, it's fairly clear that you're going to, get reach to other authors' audiences, which is awesome. And I like to think of this as essentially sort of multiplying your email campaigns. So let's say I've got a book launch coming, up in a month. What I could do is I could schedule swaps, a few days out of that book launch with a bunch of other authors that are in my genre. And so I can send my own newsletter about, hey, I've got a new release to my newsletter of 1,000 people. But if I've swapped with 4 or 5 other authors that each have 1,000 people on their own mailing lists, then I've essentially multiplied my launch audience to, 4,000 or 5,000 people instead of just my own list.
Mm. Yeah. And I think that, there's, for my example, when I started my fiction pen name, I had 0 names, and yep. I used tools like Story Origin. I don't think you were around at the time.
Yep.
And I did some work with like Art of the Arcane, mm-hmm. And was able to get 300 names.
Yeah.
on a list, right? And then it becomes a process of, now once you get to a certain level like that, then it starts to become easier to do swaps because
Right.
you have some equity to trade with people.
Right.
But in the beginning, it was begging, and just, I think one of the great things about authors is there are authors that are open to, they remember what it was like when they got started. So they're going to help,
Right.
right? They're going to give you that shot. And there's a lot of Facebook groups that are genre specific to go find, like if you're writing romance or if you're going to write science fiction, there's tons of them out there. And the other part that I think I found helpful is as a writer is if you're in that space where you don't have a whole lot to say because you're busy writing your books or you're in the midst of the series, whatever it might be, having other authors of like genres to share with your audience keeps the audience engaged and keeps your newsletter warm.
For sure. Yeah, I think that's I think that's something that's incredibly important, right? I've polled authors that are on Story Origin about how frequently they send out their newsletters. And a lot of authors, I was surprised by the number of responses that I got from authors that said, oh, I've actually experimented. So I've tried 1 month, I've tried weekly. And when I do weekly, my open rates and my click rates are actually higher than when I just do monthly. Your initial intuition might be, hey, I don't really want to bother people that frequently, so I'm just going to send out once a month. But the thing that you're putting at risk there is, if I only get a newsletter from you once a month, I probably am not going to remember necessarily exactly who you are or why you're subscribed. I think sending it out on a weekly basis, it's much easier to build a rapport with your audience and to build that real connection with them. But the problem then is, what am I going to talk about every week? I don't have a book to launch every single week. That would be crazy, right? If you're incredibly prolific, maybe you could do something there where you've got box sets or something that you can sort of group up, or maybe you're doing anthologies or short stories where you really do have sort of a story to share every week. But one great way to simply keep your audience engaged is to be doing newsletter swaps like you were saying, where you've got, hey, maybe this author's discounting it for this week. And so, your audience comes to you because they're looking for, those deals as well. And so it gives them a reason to open your email to learn about new authors.
Okay. Yeah, I think that, I know for myself, when I was first building out that series, it really made for a nice mix. I think you have to figure out what your balance is. You don't want it to be your newsletter is all about just other people's books and swaps, but having a nice balance and having it appropriate. I also surveyed my audience, and there was folks on my list that they just straight out told me the only reason they were on my list was to get access to free books.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of people get upset about that, but I think it's kind of the price of poker. And over time, they'll fade away as your list changes, right? As you're focused more on the books that you're selling. And I think that there's kind of a natural progression away from free books to like deals on books, right? Because when you're really getting your business going and you're selling books, then you're really looking more for authors that are doing deals. Now, does Story Origin deal with that also?
Yeah. So Story Origin is, there are multiple kinds of, your cross promotions with others on Story Origin, whether or not they're newsletter swaps or group promotions. Those can be for your reader magnets, which are, your free books that you use to build your newsletter, or they can be for your books that are on sale at retailers. So, and you can also join group sale promotions or group Kindle Unlimited promotions. So you're right. As you build your audience, as you build your newsletter through Story Origin, you can start to join less of those more newsletter builder focused cross promotions. You can start to join more of those sales focused cross promotions, so that as you grow, you're also now more focused on selling.
Mm-hmm.
And Story Origin has a sort of a native universal book link function, which means that when readers click on that link, they'll be corrected to their storefront for the correct storefront for their country, regardless of whether they're clicking from the UK or Canada or the United States. A lot of authors don't know this, but Amazon has different domains for each country, and so having that universal link is super, super important. So Story Origin handles all of the sort of technical infrastructure for you as an author.
Yeah. So two things kind of going back onto the newsletter building. One thing you talked about that magnet, and I think it's important to, do you have any kind of feel for like how long it takes to build a list from scratch? Do you have any, like, is it days, months? What?
It totally depends on how many group promotions that you're joining, and then also how big those group promotions are. I will say, it's not surprising to be able to get 300 or 400 signups to your newsletter within the first month of being on Story Origin. In terms of just like what a straight average is, that's a lot more difficult to say, just because it's totally going to depend on how active you are, genre, all the stuff I mentioned before.
And then for that lead magnet, that story magnet, what's your take on what it should be?
Yeah, so this is purely my gut instinct. I don't have data that I'm looking at necessarily, because unless you're a retailer and you actually have access to like the APIs of the device, you don't actually ever really know what read-through rates are going to be. But that's the sort of thing that you want to optimize, right? So you want to make sure that your read rate is really high. And I think there's there are two important things to that. One is, the length of the book, right? So you don't want it to be so long that you never actually finish it and get to the next book, because it's like kind of one of the things that you think about if you're ever going to host a podcast, right? Like your first episode, if it's an hour and a half long, the probability that you're going to listen to the second episode in that podcast is pretty low, because unless I really like that first episode, it's going to be, it's going to be sitting in my library at half a finished of the first episode. Versus especially because when you're starting out, you're probably not going to have a very good podcast, right? Production quality is going to be lower, all that stuff. So if you had like a 20-minute podcast as your first episode, the probability that someone's going to finish it is much higher. And then they'll go on to the second episode. And over time, you might evolve and you might get into doing longer and longer episodes as you get better and the production quality increases. The same thing applies to writing books, right? The shorter the book, the higher the probability that the read-through rate is going to be. At the same time, though, the second thing you have to think about is how invested is the reader in the story, right? So if it's only a 10,000, 15,000 word story, and I don't really, I don't really necessarily have time to get invested into the characters, any sort of the overarching arcs that you might have going from that prequel into the series, etc. I'm less likely to read the next book. And so you have to have this balance between being short to increase your read-through rate, but being long so that the reader feels invested in the story.
And you would suggest an actual story versus a sample?
Yes, for sure. I would definitely suggest doing a story rather than a sample. A lot of authors will sometimes just use like a 10% preview of a book. You can get a 10% preview of most books on Amazon, so you're not necessarily really delivering any value to that reader. And I find that a lot of times readers might just get upset if it's a preview and not the full book. I would much rather have a happy reader and one that feels, emotionally invested in the story that I'm telling than one that's, didn't get all the way through the story and they're not and so they're upset about that, and they don't and now they also don't really feel super invested because it's only 10% of a book or something like that. It totally depends. Probably works really well for some authors and probably doesn't work as well for other authors, because it also depends on where the sort of the pacing of your story as well, and where that ramp is and sort of the climax of your story, and are they emotionally invested at that point? Are they willing to go out and actually buy the book?
Yeah. No, and that's something I've kind of heard too from other folks, is that the first 3 chapters, a lot of folks, that actually is counterproductive, because they're like, I was expecting a whole book. And I know I've seen some folks that are running promotions where they explicitly say no samples. It's got to be They're fine if it's only a 15,000 word story or 10,000 words, but it's got to be a story. And then what's your excuse me, what's your feedback on book covers for getting lead as part of your lead magnet?
Yeah, so I mean, for your lead magnet or your reader magnet, you want to make sure that you're providing the same quality in that reader magnet as you're going to provide in your series, right? So because that is, again, that's like the reader's free trial version of you as an author, right? So if I have a bad experience with a free trial, I'm not going to subscribe to that product. If I have a bad experience reading your reader magnet, I'm not going to want to buy into the series. So you have to make sure that you have a super high quality reader magnet, and that matters both for the cover and in terms of the editing. So you want to have a really high quality cover so that you can entice readers to actually click on it, want to download it and read it. And you have to make sure that that cover also is in line with sort of the genre of the actual story itself, right? Because there's 2 different genres. There's the genre that the book cover says that the reader is going to get, and there's the genre that is the actual story itself. And you have to make sure that those things are in line, because if a reader feels like they've been tricked into reading a book that's not of the genre that they like, again, that reader's not going to go on to buy into your series, right? So you want to make sure everything's sort of on point.
Good advice. So, what I know you've been doing a lot of work recently on upgrading some things and adding new features. Why don't you kind of give the folks a feel for like how the suite works? I mean, we kind of hit 2 points, right? But there's more to it than just that. Why don't you talk about like how you're envisioning this being used as a marketing tool?
Yeah. So one of the newest things that I've released, like you were saying before, you have people on your list that are, just there for the free books and they're not necessarily there for anything else. Those readers can still be valuable to you, right? So I think of books as having 3 different kinds of economic value. Right? There's the signing up to the newsletter, right? Which when you give me your email address, you're giving me some sort of economic value, because then I can market to you when I have a new book to launch. And then there's the, straight just, you might buy my book, like when I'm doing a group sale or I'm doing a group Kindle Unlimited promotion where I'm trying to increase my page reads. The economic value that you're driving there is straight money, right? People are paying for your book or they're reading page reads, and that's, that comes back to you as an author. And then the third sort of economic value that you can get is reviews, right? And those reviews help you build social proof, which will, increase the probability that someone's going to actually buy the book whenever they're looking at your sales page for it. So reviews is sort of the third economic value that a reader can give you. And you might have a bunch of sort of freebie seekers on your list, but those freebie seekers, they might be on a budget. You don't necessarily know the reason that they're not willing to spend money on books. Might be that they're on a fixed income, what have you, but they can be still be super valuable as being reviewers of your books, right? And so the latest feature that I've introduced on Story Origin is review copies. And review copies are essentially a way to upload a book to Story Origin, and then readers can apply for review copies of that book. And you can see before you approve that reader, how many reviews have they completed on books that they've requested before on Story Origin, so that you have a good idea of whether or not they're going to complete the review if you approve them for a review copy of your book. And so those sorts of freebie seekers can still be super valuable because, if you upload a review copy, you send it out to your mailing list, then you get a bunch of requests. You can sort of look at those and approve them on a case-by-case basis. And then you can build reviews on your books. And that can be, those reviews can be at all of the major retailers. So Amazon, Kobo, Google, Apple, and Barnes & Noble. And then also on BookBub or Goodreads, right? So in Story Origin handles that entire process for you, automatically reminds the reader after they've had over 2 weeks to leave a review, if they still haven't left it yet. And, you basically don't need to do any of that tracking and manual, very manual process to track all that.
Now with that, how do you get those reviewers? Are those people off of my list, or is there a community building of reviewers on Story Origin? Can you talk more to that?
Yeah. So my vision for Story Origin in terms of what it is and what it provides is the underlying technical infrastructure for authors to cross-promote and collaborate with one another, right? So you could upload a review copy to Story Origin and just send it out to your own mailing list. But the feature that I just released last week is group promotions for review copies. So now we, as you, me, and 20 other steampunk authors can create a landing page that has, all of our review copies listed, and then readers can apply to request those review copies. And each one of us as authors, we get to approve or reject those, requests on a case-by-case basis still, and all of that great stuff. But again, it's all about us cross-promoting that landing page, so we're all helping each other out. Story Origin is what I see it as is that underlying infrastructure that helps authors work together.
Excellent. Yeah. I mean, I don't think anybody's really doing anything like that.
Oh, no. Yeah. It's totally unique to Story Origin for sure.
Well, and it's powerful in the sense of, there's been so much, foul play with reviews, and to have a way to help authors to manage that and to get, quality reviews, that's going to be helpful,
for sure.
Certainly from all the research that I've seen, having some decent social proof for your books is it's not as important as the book cover, but it's up there.
Right.
Like when they see the heat map where people go to, it's kind of like they'll look at reviews before they look at descriptions a lot of times. Yeah,
for sure. I know from my own personal experience, I definitely will check, how many reviews and what the star rating is. I might not necessarily read all of the reviews first, but that's one of the first things that I look at. And the other thing that reviews are really important for is if you want to apply and get accepted for paid newsletter promotions, a lot of the spots in those newsletter promotions, they'll only give to you if you have X number of reviews on your book. And when
good point.
When you're a new indie author just starting out, or you've got a new release, it's really hard to get all of those reviews lined up and have them there on launch day. So with Story Origin, those review copies can be either for pre-publication or post-publication. You've noticed maybe that I keep saying review copies instead of arcs, and that's the reason, right? The review copies feature on Story Origin isn't purely for advanced review copies. It's, you know, pre or post-publication. So you can create your review copy on Story Origin pre-publication, build up that list of people that are ready to review on launch day through those group cross promotions. And then on launch day, when you've published the book, it'll you can mark it as published on Story Origin. It'll send an email to those people who have gotten review copies and say, hey, you know, this book is published now. You can go and leave your reviews at these various links. And so yeah. And then from there, it's, okay, now I've got my 10 or however many reviews I need. Let me buy into some paid newsletter promos so that I can keep this momentum going.
Mm. Yeah, and I also think what came to my mind is if I was looking at a strategy where like, well, I think I need to be better represented on a different platform.
Right. Yep.
I could target that platform and say, hey, I'm looking for people to review on Apple if I'm wide, or if I'm trying to get something going on BookBub, right?
Yep, that's right. So with review copies on Story Origin, essentially what you do is you post all of the links where you have that book available. So, you know, that might be all of those retailers plus BookBub and Goodreads. And then you as the author, you can mark particular retailers as ones that you're prioritizing for when you want to give out those review copies. And so when readers apply, they'll see which, you know, platforms you're prioritizing for where you want reviews, and they can say, you know, okay, yeah, I will review at those ones that you're prioritizing. And you as the author, you get to see which platforms they're planning on reviewing at. So let's say you've got 100 reviews on Amazon. You're not really focused on that as getting more reviews there. Where you really want reviews, let's say, are Goodreads and BookBub. If I get a request from someone that says they're only going to review on Amazon, I can decline that request for that review copy. Mm-hmm. And if someone says that they're going to review it on Goodreads and BookBub, which I've prioritized, then I'll approve that person for a review copy because that's where I'm trying to build my reviews.
Good point. So that's kind of the latest thing. Is there other stuff you think folks need to know about with the product?
You know, I would say the other thing with Story Origin is just like a lot of those cross promotions and links that you get will all be tracking links so that there's transparency in the community, which is a really big part of it. Because you can organize all the kinds of cross promotions that we've talked about. You could organize on your own WordPress website. You could organize them through Facebook groups and Google Forms and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, there's still a free rider problem of, you know, authors who aren't giving back to the community. They're not, they're not lifting the hand. They're not stretching a hand out to those people who had to come up through the same process that they did. Right. And so Story Origin makes that super transparent that, you know, when you do a newsletter swap with someone, you're both getting tracking links, and you can go and you can see before you swap with someone, how many links, how many clicks did they send this other author in their past swap, so that you actually know whether or not that person's going to hold up their end of the bargain, which isn't something that you can get through really any other platform or, you know, through Facebook groups or anywhere else, right? Mm-hmm. So Story Origin is sort of also helps you build up your reputation in the author community in general.
I think you missed the big one, which is it's free. Right?
Yeah. So Story Origin is also in what I'm calling an open beta, which basically means it's all of the features are completely free to use. No restrictions on anything, as many downloads as you want, collect subscribers, all that kind of stuff. You know, the reason I'm doing that isn't because, you know, Story Origin is a crappy piece of software. You know, one of the reviews that I get most frequently from authors is that actually Story Origin as the user interface and all of that stuff is a much better platform than a lot of other things that they've tried. The reason that it's free, right, is because I'm still working out what the pricing model is going to be. because that's super important to me. I really want to make sure that I'm providing you a strong return on investment for investing in Story Origin. And so I want to make sure that I have that sort of case nailed down before I figure out what the pricing model is going to be.
Mm-hmm.
But that being said, like if you sign up for the open beta now, you're still going to get it free for several months, even after it becomes paid. And even when it does become paid for you, maybe it's going to be, it's not going to be extremely or prohibitively expensive. It'll probably be, something like 10 or 15 bucks a month or something
Mm-hmm.
like that. Because again, they're like, what I'm really focused on is providing you a return on investment.
Yeah. So kind of from what I know of your background, when you do finally figure out what that model is, your intention is you want to keep as many paid subscribers as possible to keep that recurring revenue going, like you're sharing with authors. So best way to do that is to really have it something that's fitting for whatever your economic level is, right? So
yeah.
But the main thing is right now, there's no tricks. It's free, and at some point that will change. But the more people you get on this thing, the easier it's going to be for you to figure out what everybody needs and to make it the most valuable product for everybody. So
exactly, yeah. And I mean, you could go out there and try to cobble together everything that Story Origin does right now. We haven't really talked about it at all, but Story Origin on those like universal book links and all that kind of stuff, you can still add like your Facebook pixel. And so you still get those like advanced features, even with Story Origin, for those who are super in the grain with all their marketing and all of that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, you could go out and you could try to cobble together some set of platforms which replicate what Story Origin does. But doing so would probably be pretty expensive, because some of these platforms, like if you look at NetGalley, that's like hundreds of dollars, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Story Origin essentially provides the same service. So you might have something that you use for reviews. You might have something you use for reader magnets and landing pages. You might have something that you use for like your universal book links. You might have something that you use for newsletter swaps. You might have different platforms for solving all of these various problems. And Story Origin is sort of the all-in-one package. And hey, isn't it nice that you can use it completely for free right now? So
cool. Well, where can they find this product, and how do they get in touch with you? And
yeah. So you can go to storyoriginApp.com, and my email address is evan@storyorg.in. So it's right there if you if you have trouble figuring out how to spell that out. My email address is right there on the contact page on Story Origin, and it's like right there at the bottom when you scroll down to the bottom on the front page. I'm super transparent about who I am, what I'm doing, everything. So feel free to shoot me an email if you ever have questions. Yeah.
And then don't you have a Facebook group or like?
There is a Facebook group as well called Story Origin Authors. So if you search Story Origin Authors on Facebook, you'll find the Facebook group. You can join there. Shoot me a friend request if you want. Or, you can even message me on Facebook if you have questions. Like, again, super transparent about who I am, what I'm doing, all that kind of stuff. So, I'm happy to communicate whatever way works for you.
Great. So anything else you want to kind of add? Stuff that's coming out or things that you think are important?
I think we covered it all. I mean, I'm always upgrading and improving features on Story Origin. And so yeah, I mean, there's definitely still stuff that I'm going to be doing to improve the platform even more from where it is now. But nothing necessarily that's worth sharing right now.
Great. All right. Well, thanks for coming on and sharing all that. And keep us in the loop as far as anything that comes up in the future that'll help authors make their business grow.
Awesome. Thanks for having me on, Joe.
All right. Talk to you later, Evan.
All right. Thanks. Bye.